Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again, and Happy New Year. Today is just Phil and me, and I think we are going to talk about AV separates. Is that right, Phil?
That is correct. Hello, everyone. So actually, we'll say, where is Cam? So Cam is actually on the road fixing a pair of Nautilus. So he is now one of the few people in the US that is capable of fixing a pair of Nautilus. So I guess that kind of overrides our web podcast today. But I think we're gonna I think we have a couple of products we want to talk about, as well some new models, and then just talk about how to best choose the right combination of AV processors and amplifiers for your particular job. So Frederic, why don't you normally go through the housekeeping first, and then about chat and questions and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. So I think everyone knows how that works, right? The chat for YouTube. So we're having different channels for us to receive questions, but the chat, I think, is the easiest for us to look for. So I think we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll try and address as many of these questions as possible.
So before we get started, let's start with the basics. Frederic, what do you believe are some of the benefits of utilizing separates?
Yeah, so if you have the space, because that's a prerequisite, of course, separate boxes with separate power supplies and separate processing is always going to be superior to everything in a single box, where a single power supply needs to supply power to different circuits, for example. So I would say it's the same story as with hi-fi, a preamplifier and a power amplifier in a separate box, and that's kind of the same with AV processors. The processing is done, so the preamplifier part plus processing in one box, and then all the amplification circuitry in a separate box that drives the number of speakers that you have.
Yeah.
So the main thing, I guess, right?
Yeah, because if you think, like, as you had mentioned, an AV receiver is the processor, the video switcher, and the amplifiers all in one box. And while you can achieve pretty good performance doing that, or very good performance doing that, it's always better to separate. So as Frederic said, the components can be bigger. They can be bigger, they can be better. Also, the other thing is the flexibility of expanding. Normally, if you look at a surround sound system, an AVR, what becomes outdated is the video switching and the surround sound processing. But the amplifiers are always really, really good, and they continue to be good. A 5-year-old, 10-year-old amplifier is still great. It's just everything else around it in that AVR probably needs to be upgraded. By buying it as separate pieces, a processor and then an amplifier, one of these amplifiers, then the amplifier will always live in your product, in your house. Now it's just upgrading your video switching or your processing. So it's more, so you get a lot more bang for your buck if you do that. It's a more expensive investment at the beginning, but the component, it makes for expandability and flexibility a lot easier. So today we're going to be talking about two new additions to the Marantz AV Separates lineup. And that is, we introduced the new AV 30 and the new Amp 30. So, and those are the products that we have in front of us. We're going to go through and talk about each one individually, but the goal is pick the amplifier you need and the processor you need to achieve your goals. So if we're going to go back and we're going to talk about these one by one, and then we'll also talk about what the differences are. between the two. You know what, Frederic? Why don't we first talk about what the differences are? So I actually have a slide. Can you bring up the slide on the presentation? And let's talk first about the AV processors, right? So let's talk first about that.
Yeah, so AV10, AV20, and now the smallest sibling, AV30. In terms of processing capabilities, it's all the same except for the number of channels that it processes. So you're going from 15.4 to 13.4 to 11.4. And a lot of people will probably start with some smaller setups. It's only when you're expanding that it makes more sense to add more channel processing.
Yes.
But
exactly. And now there
go
are
ahead.
a few other differences between the models. When you look at something like right here at the top is an AV 30. Right below that is an AV 20. And then right below that again is the AV 10. The AV 10 is actually has a larger chassis. So if I was going to, I have a picture of the unit. If he puts up this picture, you'll see that the AV 10 is a larger chassis. That unit is a little deeper than what you would see on a traditional AVR. Why? Because that is the optimum arrangement to place those components, the amplifier stages, and all of the parts. So in order to do the optimum location, required a larger chassis. Now, so not only does it have more processing channels, you go from 13 to 15. It also, the layout is laid out a little better, which makes the box a little deeper. If you look at the AV10 and the AV20, they both have copper plated chassis. The AV30 has a traditional steel chassis. So that's another kind of upgrade you can immediately see in these drawings. You can also see where the toroidal power supply and the symmetry of the AV10 and the AV20. Those layouts, that chassis, to do that makes it more expensive. Moving on from that, there's some other little differences between the units that we would point out really quick. The AV10 and the AMP10 utilizes tons of HDAM boards, hyperdynamic amplifier modules. And these are utilized to take little signals and boost them into big signals. And you'll find them in the headphone amp, the phono preamp, and also all of the surround sound processing channels. This here is a photograph of an AV20s, actually an AV10s, HDAM boards that are utilized for the surround sound processing channels to take the little signal from the processor and make it big enough to utilize for preamp. And if you see on those pictures, there are individual boards for each channel. And so Frederic, how would you describe an HDAM versus an op amp?
Yeah, so that's one of the typical technologies that Marantz is using. So traditionally, manufacturers would use a op amp, and mostly this is an off-the-shelf op amp that has a fixed sound. So the way we do things at Marantz, we make our own operational amps with discrete components rather than a single chip. So the advantage of these little discrete components is that you can tune the sound to where you want it to be. And Ogata-san, our sound master, is the person who's basically doing this. And we have different versions. We make upgrades, like for the AV30, we also use the HDAM A2, a brushed up version. So you look at it as a recipe, a standard recipe of an HDAM, and then with the discrete components, you can buy the ingredients that you prefer most to make that perfect dish.
Exactly.
And then for every single application, we'll modify so that we can get the sound to be, or the amplification or whatever filtering function that we use it for, can get the exact sound that where we want it to be.
Okay, yeah, exactly. It's like for an op amp would be like buying a high quality pre-made sauce. An HDAM would be making your sauce from scratch using the ingredients you choose to make the sauce exactly what you want. One of the main benefit when you're listening from an op amp compared to an HDAM is a higher slew rate, which is basically the response time. So if you have a thunderclap, the ability of an HDAM to go from off to full on is quicker. So you end up with more dynamics. So not only do you get a better tuning, but you also end up with more dynamics. So if you go back to that photo, you'll see that each channel, each surround sound processing channel has its own dedicated HDAM board, right? If you look at something like the AV30, that should be AV30, not AMP30. I apologize because I was typing really fast. The AV30 has multiple HDAM circuits or on a single board, right? The way to think about it is this way. The ingredients are still the ingredients, right? There is a certain, to make this particular HDAM, where there's and there's different types of HDAMs. Say we're going to make an HDAM SA2. That recipe calls for a certain amount of resistors, capacitors, and parts. When you build a board individually, each resistor, each capacitor, each part could be bigger, higher tolerances. It's still the same ingredient when I go back to that board that has multiples on there, but in order to fit multiple HDAMs on a single board, the size of each of the components needs to be miniaturized. Does it still sound good? Yes. But the optimum way is to use the biggest parts, the highest tolerance parts, and keep them separate for better channel separation and things like that. So those are the main differences. If you go back to the unit between the copper chassis and then things such as a single board, leave that on, please. A single board versus the versus going back here and looking at the multiple boards that are on the unit. But other things such as the HDMI capabilities and all of that stuff is common. It's just that those are kind of the differences between an AV30 and versus the AV10 and the AV20. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
So that's the difference when you look inside the box. If I pulled the lids off, because I can't pull the lids off here, but there's some differences. And if you see them side by side, or you see the internal shot and the shot from the back, it becomes immediately obvious that they're different. So by the way, if you have any questions, make sure you put them into the public chat, and we'll make sure that we answer them along the way. Scott B is asking, actually one of the guys was asking about a Blu-ray player. That's funny. I will make that suggestion to the guys at the engineering team at Shirakawa and see what they actually say. Yeah, so those are some of the differences between an AV20 and an AV10, an AV20, and an AV30. Measurement wise, very close, right? Capability when it comes to video switching, very close. All of the functionality that you would find on a Marantz AV separate processor, pretty much identical. The main difference is how many channels and the construction of the box, which is what dictates the differences between the units. Okay. Anything else you want to add, Frederic, about those?
Yeah, just the processing, the DACs are also slightly different, right? So we're using basically stereo DACs, and there's 9 of those in the AV20, and there's 10 of those in the AV10. AV10, that's also from ESS. Whereas with the AV30, we did it slightly different. We're using 2 8-channel DACs. So there's different processors that will have different things. So they will sound very close, but the implementation of the DAC system and then the circuitry with the jitter suppressor, that is slightly different on how that's implemented.
So producer Nick, if you hide Frederic and then bring it full screen, just actually if you hit the little button at the bottom that says, see the one that has the big picture on the side? That one. Oh, you got to pick me. There we go. So this is what Frederic was talking about. There are some differences in the unit, how the boards are laid out, and things like that. You can actually see it you can actually see it here. So as you said, how many boards you have, you said the stereo DACs, the size of the cabinet, and all of those particular things are some of the reasons why there's a difference between those particular models. But either way, I love both of them. In my particular home, I am perfectly fine with an AV30. Why? Because in my home, I have a Dolby Atmos system, but my system is a 5.1.4. So when you factor that in, I have 9 channels, and this is 11. So that is more than enough to meet my needs in my particular space, and still give me the option to grow my system to a 7.1.4 if I choose to in the future. But the way my room is, it wouldn't really work for my particular application. Frederic, do you have surround sound in your home?
Yes, I do. It's fairly basic, so it's a 5.2 because I got 2 subwoofers, 0.2. So 5.2.2, only 2 high channels. Basically, I'm using the Cinema 40 for that one. However, I've got 2 large front speakers. It's 802 from Bowers & Wilkins, but Series 2. It's a very old one, 1989, the Matrix series. They're a little power hungry. And that's why I use a dedicated amplifier specifically for that. So it's slightly different. I use the front pre-outs from the Cinema 40, and I go into a PMKI just for stereo sound. And then when I listen to watch movies and stuff, I switch into power amp mode. I could replace that, for example, with a AV30. So a combination of a Cinema 40 with an AV30 to power the front left 2 speakers, and I could even bi-amp a center speaker, so to speak. So that's what we're trying to explain today, is how flexible you can be by using different components together in one system, where you can listen to pure music, high-end, or watch movies at the same time with the right amount of power by using separates.
Exactly. Right? So so we're going to get into that, but at first we just want to tell you there's a difference between the 30, the 20, and the 10, right? My house, like I said, I'm fine with a 30. I have all the stuff I need. Oh, by the way, if you're someone that says, well, I have a AV7706, why would I upgrade to an AV30? There's lots of reasons. First thing, better video switching. You go from one 8K input, an input and output, to all of the inputs on the back, and all of the second zone and the monitor 1 and monitor 2 being 8K. So you go from 1 input to like 7 inputs and 3 outputs. The next thing, the AV30 has 4 sub outs. Well, while the AV7706, which was the model that would have 11 channels as a processor, has 2. This also has Dirac capability, Dirac Live, Dirac bass control capability. It has an upgraded web UI. It has upgraded HDMI diagnostics. It has a upgraded GUI, HDMI GUI system. There's a tremendous amount of upgrades that have been done to this unit. So even if you, I think about separates, say you're someone that already has a bunch of the older amplifiers, what were the amplifiers called? I can't remember what the ones were, because they were
something.
Yeah, the
This is a 7 channel.
You already had your MM8077s, and the whole thing is great. And now you just want to advance your performance of your system by upgrading your surround sound processing and your video capabilities. Swapping this AV30 in to replace your AV7706 will make a noticeable improvement in the performance of your system and give you a lot more capabilities, like adding those extra subs and Dirac. So this is a great way of taking everything you've already have, all your content you already own, and by swapping out a bigger, better, newer brain, you can get more capabilities from that system. So someone said, what's the difference? What I hear or see a difference between the Marantz products and a similarly priced product from your sister company, Denon? That's a very good question. The way that it normally works is Marantz products, because they utilize HDAMs and things like copper chassis and toroidal power supplies, normally use more parts that are higher quality parts that cost a little bit more money, right? So first thing is Marantz Denon does not make separates. So you would have to do something like a 11 channel would be something like a 6800. And the issue with that is you go back to separates, the benefits of separates, bigger parts, everything isolated, and the flexibility versus a single box. So if I go back here and I look, I have a slide that actually shows that, and it just shows kind of a Denon piece. So, I mean, a Marantz piece. So this also applies when it comes to, if you're looking at a Denon unit. If I have a single unit, I can get it all in there, but compared to the being able to break it out into multiples, you're going to get better performance. So if you want to get into separates and you want the flexibility of separates, that is a Marantz conversation. Denon goes out of their way to build the most high performance single chassis solutions, which are like A10, A1Hs, A10Hs. When Marantz gets up near that price point, they go into separates. It's going to cost you more, but this is the ultimate way of doing it. And then it says, is there any point to running a smaller sub if you already have a massive one? Yes, there is. Frederic, what's the benefit of running multiple subs in a room?
Well, obviously, if you have one sub in one room, you're going to have nulls and peaks in specific spots. So the only way to do that is by adding another sub in a specific location to fill that gap, so that you have more distributed bass. And we know now with Dirac ART, it's also beneficial to have multiple subs in separate locations, because you will have better distributed bass, basically.
Yes, and they don't have to be the same size, by the way. It would be great in a perfect world for equally sized subwoofers, but it really doesn't matter. You will get noticeable bass improvement. In my own personal home, I have a 12-inch DT in the front of the room, but to even out the peaks and nulls, we put a little 10-inch in the behind the couch and to the left, or to the left of the couch. And what that did is it really improved the sound. The two subs work together. So while it'd be great for you to have two of the same size, adding a sub, any sub, to help in a different location in your room will help smooth out your bass. So yes, it would be worthwhile to run both of them, as long as you have a receiver or an AV processor, such as something like one of these Marantzes that can measure and EQ them. And what it does, these receivers, what they do is they measure both subs to get the levels, then they play them together to make sure that they don't conflict. So the goal is to get the best bass at the seating positions. So long as you have a receiver that can EQ those independently, which any Denon or Marantz receiver will do, you will be good to go. All right. So those are good points. So separates are always the better way to go. We're going to get in and talk more about the combinations that are available. But the first thing we want to talk about after we go from the AV separates to is the amplifiers. So there's going to be 3 different amplifier solutions, depending on how many channels that you want. So if you the AV10 has 16 channels. The AV20 has 14 channels, 12 channels. It's been a long day. And then the AV30 has 6 channels. The thing we get asked a lot is, why are they even when most of the systems are, 7.1 or 8.1, I mean 7.1 or 5.1 or 13 channels. And that is because of how the amplifier modules are done. The amplifier modules are stereo modules, and for economy of scale, it would cost more to make an independent mono channel to make an odd number than it would to use 6, 12, or 16. So 16 is 8 of these modules, right? Now, of course, there's applications where you could utilize that extra channel, maybe for a secondary center, A lot of big TVs would benefit from having a center above the TV and a center below the TV. When you start getting into larger screens, to give you a better stereo image. So those are some of the options that you could actually do. But the amplifier modules are stereo modules. If you look at the amplifiers, the two amplifiers, you'll notice that the benefit of the 30 is it's a very slim design. It's a 6-channel, very slim design. If you are someone who would maybe wants to start off with a processor and then decide that, you know what, right now I only have a 5-channel system, this is a great option, an amp 30. Say you are someone that has an AV, already has an AVR, but instead you want to power your left, right, and center with a lot more power, and an amp 30 would be a great addition to that, and we'll talk about those combinations later. If you need more channels, then you would maybe move up to an amp 20. And in my house, an amp 20 would be a great combination to go with. An amp 20, that guy, would be a great combination to go with this guy. So it'd be an AV 30 with an amp 20, would give me enough power to drive my system and have power to drive a second zone of 800 series that are sitting in front of my fireplace. So it all depends on the combination and what you're going to do. So my Marantz does have dual output. Depends on what Marantz you have, my friend. Depending on the Marantz you have the ability to do a lot. You can do double center channels. You can opt to biamp. If you can do a lot of different options depending on the Marantz AVR that you actually have. But moving on, if you go back to the board, if you look at the board, this is a board that you would find in the board that you would find in an amp 10 or an amp 20. They're stereo boards. The amp 20 is a 12-channel. You would see 6 of these inside of that chassis. The amp 10 is a 16-channel, and you would see 8 of these in that chassis. So that's what you would see there. And by the way, these amplifiers are digital amps, Class C amplifiers that we actually build in Shirakawa. They're based on a recipe, but these are all custom made by us, for our particular application. And of course, having these boards done this way gives you better separation between all the channels. You're less likely to have noise interference. You have better channel separation. There's a lot of benefits of doing them in this modular way. Now, if you look at an amp 10 and an amp 20, there are multiple boards that are inside of that chassis. So if you look there, you see not only are there multiple amplifier boards, there's something, if you look behind it, that has like little double resistors. Each amp channel has their own HDAM. So it's multiple amp boards plus multiple HDAM channels built into this guy. But it's really hard to do that in such a slim chassis as an amp 30. So the approach they took there was, now you have multiple of the digital 2-channel amp cards built onto a single board, which allows it to be smaller. Is that the best way to explain that, Frederic?
Yeah, pretty much. I think the modules themselves, we didn't really talk much about it, right? So it's a recipe. I think we can, a lot of people are asking, so what's the difference between the previous Class D and why are you using different modules? So for this particular AV series, we use a recipe from Ice Power. We work with them together to get the right specs. So it's not an off-the-shelf amp. It's one that we specified specifically with them. They gave us the recipe, and then we built it in our Shirakawa factory ourselves with our own ingredients, not specifically the ones that are on their boards.
Exactly.
So this is, again, like one way to to fine tune the sound to where we want it to be.
Yeah.
And then basically, like you said, there's separate modules in the AV20 and AV10, but to make it easier for the slim form factor and to get a shorter signal path, we also put them on one single board for the AV30. Similar sounds, but a different form factor.
Yeah. If you look at Marantz rarely buys pre-made boards. We just don't do it. If we like your recipe, we may purchase or license your recipe, but then we go in and doctor up that recipe and improve that recipe to get to the channels or to get to the quality that we're looking for. So we bought a very good recipe, and then we use a better cut of meat, better spices, and everything else to take that recipe to the next level. And it worked. And each year, each time a Marantz engineer builds a new product, they're thinking about what could I do better the next time. So if you look at the amps, I used to have an MM 8077, which was the 7-channel Marantz Class AB amplifier. The first thing is this chassis that for something like an amp 20 has almost double the amount of amplifier channels, double the power, and it's actually cooler, and it handles an even more demanding load. So they looked at it and said, Marantz has been really good at building very good Class D amplifiers. Or if you look at something like a PM10, you look at something like a Model 30. So they took that expertise and said, we know how to build warm, musical sounding Class D switching amplification. And what we're going to do is we're going to utilize that in order to build these amplifiers. In our own theater, by the way, originally in our theater, when we built it, we had 8 PM10s to drive the main system. We replaced, we had 8 PM10s and an MM 8077 to drive the Bauer system in that room. We have replaced 8 PM10s and an MM 8077 with 2 amp 10s. So I went from having a rack that was 7 feet tall to a stack that's probably about the size of this stack right here, to drive that entire system. And it plays as loud with as much impact in a very compact things, which is why we went to this in this solution. Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple more advantages also with Class D and the modules that we're using. Previous AB, the power consumption, of course, it runs much hotter. It consumes more power, so they run more efficiently. They're cooler, you already said that. The Class D amplifier modules also have a shorter signal path in the sense where the binding posts are directly connected to the modules. And also something we did with this particular AV series is we're using copper bus bars rather than using wires. If we bring up a photo of one of the insides, yes. So the copper bus bars also have an advantage that the impedance is lower, more stable, and you get a much more accurate, solid performance in terms of the connectivity. So I think Class AB is good. You have 2 camps. You have those who prefer Class AB. You have those who have Class D. So here is another upgrade path. If you're thinking that you want more power, more dynamics, upgrading your MM series to AV series and changing from AB to Class D topology is also a nice upgrade path. So you will definitely notice the difference.
Yeah. So it's funny. Somebody's but there's a question in the chat about, what's the direct replacement for an AV 8805, which is what I used to have. Probably the closest to that, which would be an upgrade, would be the AV20. Thank you, Fred, for actually answering that. If you're looking for 13 channels, so going to that, you get more more AK inputs, more capabilities. So yes, that would be the direct. The reason why we built the AV10 was people said I want more. So the AV10 allows us in our theater to run a 946 in our theater. And is that overkill for many applications? Yes. until you play with it and have 6 heights plus surround wides. Because we used to fight about that when, like, the Bowers, my Bowers partners who came over loved the 9.4 for the spaciousness of the space, and I loved the 7.6 because of the immersiveness above the top. And we would go back and forth about what's the best combination when we had an AV 8805. That conversation is gone. The Bowers people get their wide, huge on the ground soundstage of a 9-channel, on 9-channel bed layer, and then I get the 6 height channels for my particular application. So it's a win-win situation for someone who can afford it and has the extra space. All right. So as we go through here, either way, the quality of these units are very, 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 very good. The fit and finish, they're balanced balance inputs to reduce the noise. The quality of them are just exceptional when you buy these models. So what I want to talk about.
If you go back to the previous slide, you have the 3 modes we can also talk about.
Yeah,
you see that button there.
So what are those 3 modes when you talk about the amplifiers, Frederic?
Well, it's in normal mode, it will be 2 times 200 watts, unless you're using 4 ohm speakers and it's 400. But if it's 8 ohm, it's 200 watts. So you can buy amped them. That means you can use separate channel for the low frequency and another one for the high frequency. There's also BTL mode. That's the bottom one. That's bridge tide load, where you basically combine the power of both channels to get to 400 instead of 200 watts.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and in our theater space, if you look at our theater space, we actually utilize it that way. So we have a 9, like as I mentioned, a 946. And we're using large Bowers custom theater. So what we chose for that space was we chose an AV10 to get the processing. And then we took 2 at the time, because that was the only thing that was available when we built the system, 2 amp 10s. And what we're doing is we're running 400 by 9 all the way around the base layer. So 400 by 9, if you do, so that's so we're basically BTLing channels, right? So in order to do 400 by 9, I need 18 channels right off the box, right? Then I need 6 height channels of 6 by 200. So when you add that up, we needed 24 amplifier channels to do that. And in the dual amp 10s gave us 32. So we had enough, but I'm not using all the amplifiers. If I wanted to now, because now we have more amplifiers to choose from, I could have used an AV 10, because remember we're trying to get to 24 channels. This is 16, and then I could have got a maybe an amp 10. I mean an amp 10 and an amp 20 would have been enough channels to achieve that goal. So it isn't, like I said, this amp, an AV10 and an amp 10 have to go together. You pick the processing channels you want. Actually, let's go back and start from the beginning. If you're trying to determine whether you want what amplifier goes with what processor, the question you need to ask yourself, how many channels, surround channels, do I want? How big and how demanding the load is of the speakers, and how many additional zones do I want to utilize? So if I go, wow, I have really, really big speakers, you may want a BTL. So you're going to take 2 channels and bridge them together and get 400 watts per channel. You may say, well, I have 13 channels, right? So, okay, I got 13 channels, means I need 13 channels. How many of those need to be BTL? So you would kind of work your way through, and based on the size of the speaker you're using, the amount of channels you're using, and maybe you want to run a second zone or third zone, that's how you would pick the right combination. to figure out what amplifier goes with what processor. Okay. So let me give you a couple of examples. So Nick's going to have to try to move around and hide Frederic. So here are some examples that we could talk about. All right. Of course, it's flipped backwards. So, but that's just the way it is. So Frederic, you could read these better than I can because it's backwards. So let's talk about these combinations. So can you see them right side, right side? So let's talk about the combinations real quick.
Okay, so in this case, case A is a 5.1 setup. It's an M30. You use a normal output. So but these are what? These are 805s or no, 804 or 803?
804, 803, yeah.
Right, and it's a smaller center speaker. So this would be a standard 5.1 setup, which is what most people would go for. Then in this case, case B, and I have to look at the other feed here, 7.1.4 setup with an M20, also used in normal connections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so basically you would be driving 200 watts per channel on either one of those two use cases, right?
Exactly. So now you're driving 200 watts per channel. If we move up here, this is another example. You go to say you have a Cinema 40 already, and you love your Cinema 40, but you bought a bigger set of speakers, or and now you want even more power. A good Marantz amplifier, they have what's called you have assignable pre-outs, so you can go in and you can opt to choose what channels in your surround sound system are being driven by the amplifier, by an amplifier, and what channels are being driven by the AVR. So say I take something like this Cinema 40 right here. I can use the Cinema 40 to drive maybe the surround backs, and the 4 heights. Then I could take something like an Amp 30 and I can put it in BTL mode, and I can send 400 watts per channel to my my left, my center, and my right, because I went out and bought bigger ones and I want more impact. So that's another thing I want to stress. These amplifiers can be utilized along with AV receivers as well. It's just about, like I said, how big are the speakers, how many channels you want to drive, and how many other additional zones would you like to drive as well. And that's another example. So that was case A. If you look at case B, case B is, I guess case A and case B are, okay. One of them was 200 watts per channel. Why would you do that? I would BTL it, right? So you could, so case A is the amplifiers driving all your main 5 channels. Case B, it's BTL to drive the 3 channels. The other thing you could do is you could run, use the amplifier to run all of your left, right, and center. You could use the AVR to drive your surrounds, your surround backs, and your heights, and then take the rest of the power that is built into your your Amp 30 and drive a second zone. So, for example, say you had another pair of speakers sitting in your main room and your significant other doesn't want you to put any additional boxes next to the fireplace. You could put 2 beautiful speakers next to the fireplace and drive that off the second zone of this unit. And you could literally have surround sound going in the main room with a 7.4 and be able to be playing music with a substantial amount of power, and on the other side of the house with a pair of high-end floor standing speakers. Tons and tons of combinations. And of course, here's another one. Say you start off with something like a Cinema 70. It's one of our most popular little amplifiers that we have. It's a small, compact surround sound, a small, compact AV receiver. But you decide in the future that now you want more power. The processing is the processing. You have say you have more than enough surround sound processing channels, and you have more than enough video switching, but you just want more oomph in your system. You could pair those two together And now you could take that Cinema 70 and take it to the next level. So that product can actually continue to be utilized. So those are some other examples of that. Or you can also see, you can use the Cinema 70 to run your surrounds, and you could BTL your left, right, and center. The combinations are infinite. So Frederic, let's talk about some combinations here. So I'll start with me, and then I would love to see what kind of combinations people could come up with in the chat. If you got some ideas, let me know. And then we'll answer the questions as well. We haven't forgot about you. So me personally, because I hate to say it, but I like to talk about my systems whenever I possibly can. So in my house, I could do something like a AV and AV30, right? And I could pair that with an amp 20. That would probably work for me, because if I wanted to, I have a 5.4, actually now 5.4.4. I only need 9 channels. So now I have an 11 channel processor, and I want it for the video switching. I want it for the DIRAC. I want it for the subwoofer outs. I want it for the bass control. I want it for the AK switching. I want it for the GUI. So I'm going to get this amp, this AV30. The 12 channel amplifier, the AV20, is more than what I need. I do the math, I have 3 channels left over. So what I could do now is I have a pair of the new Bowers 8.3 end walls, the big ones. So I'm probably going to run all 3 on the front under BTL. So now I'm running 3 by 400 for my LCR, and then the rest of the channels, the ceiling heights and the surrounds, I'm running at 200 watts per channel. So that's one way I could use this amplifier. Say I want to go beyond that, because I have multiple zones in my house. I would still get the AV30 because I only need 9 channels of surround, but I probably would upgrade to the amp 10. And you go, well, why would you do that? You have 6, that would give you 16 channels. That's way more than what you need. Well, if I do that, I could BTL 400 by 3 across the front. I can use 200 for my surrounds per channel, 200 for my 4 heights per channel, and I could power a zone 2, which is my living room, and a zone 3, which is my backyard, off of that one amplifier, because I already have it wired back to my rack. So now I have this optimized surround sound system, which I can play, and then I can fire up the Heels board here and feed that to the backyard, or feed that to the backyard and the living room if I want to. So huge amount of options there that you could actually do. So by using this amplifier, I could start off with, if I just need 5 channels, I could buy that. Or if I want 5 channels and I want surround heights, I could buy a 20. If I want this, I want surround heights, and multiple zones, I would pair this AV30 with an amp 10. So there is no, this piece has to go with this piece. It's choose the processor, determine how big the channels and how much power you want per channel, and how many additional zones that you want to utilize. All right. So actually, let's answer some of these questions. Okay, so what's the first one?
Yes, somebody was asking, will an amp 10 run Kev reference meta 1, for example, in BTL mode, especially in a small room, not running it at a high volume?
Okay.
I think perfectly possible.
Yeah, I think perfectly. So let me tell you what you could do with this thing if you want to. So if you BTL the channels, you get 400 watts per channel. If those speakers can be bi-amped, you could BTL the top for 400 watts and the bottom for 400 watts and run 800 watts to each channel, to each speaker. If that has, pull the binding posts out, the little shorting bars out, and use 400 watts to run the high frequency, 400 watts to run the low frequency per speaker. So you can run 800 watts to the left speaker and 800 watts to the right speaker. So it can absolutely drive that unit. That may be the reason why you opt to buy an AV10 instead of an amp and instead of an AV20 in a surround sound system, because you can do something crazy like that for a giant set of speakers. Okay. So, but for you, absolutely the KEF reference. We always say it's better to have more power than required, even at lower volumes, because it gives you better control. You know, so even though you're not going to play it at extreme levels, just having that extra power gives you better current delivery, which gives you better control of the speaker, which gives you better bass even at lower volumes. Okay. So, okay, what else? That was a very good question. So, Frederic, what are some other combinations that we can talk about? So we already
Well,
talked
like in
about.
my setup,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, like my setup at home, for example, that's a Cinema 40. It should run all perfectly fine, but my front left and right are a little power hungry. Even though I modified the crossover, it sounds better if you buy them, and that's a possibility too. So the Cinema 40 plus like an AV30, sorry, an Amp 30 to get the additional power. And then I can also a BTL for the center speaker. So I have bi-amp for left and right, and I can do a BTL for the center speaker, which is an HDAM 71, so also rather large. And then I use the processing or the remainder of the channels from the Cinema 40 to power the high channels and the surrounds.
Yeah, I mean, so I look at Cam's system. Cam has a 7.4 currently. So he would probably buy the maybe 30. And he would probably, because he has multiple zones as well, there's a good chance that he would probably, for him, his speakers are smaller than mine. So he could probably get away with, he would probably still, because he wants multiple zones, he would still probably gravitate more towards an amp 10. The nice thing about these amps, by the way, is because the heat coming off of the AVRs actually generate a little bit even more heat a lot of times than the amplifiers. And that's because the heat that you fill on the AV processors are actually coming from the HDMI boards, hence the big heat sinks on the HDMI boards. So a lot of times people worry about putting a big amplifier into a cabinet. And because the benefit of being digital or Class D switching is the heat generated by the amplifiers are less. So as long as you have the depth for something like an amp 10, as long as you have the depth for an amp 10, it should be fine in most applications. We have two of these stacked in a salamander cabinet along with the AV processor. And with the doors closed, we have no heat problems whatsoever. So what we're doing in our room is, like I mentioned, we have an AV10 for your surround sound processor, because it's 9 Bowers CT custom theaters on the floor. And then we have 6 big Bowers in ceilings. So what we're doing is we took one amp 10 and it is running the left side of the room and the center channel, right? So left front, 400 watts, left surround, 400 watts, left rear surround on that side, 400 watts, the center channel, 400 watts. Then it's running 200 for the left front height, 200 for the left center height, and 200 for the left rear height. Then we took the other amplifier and it runs 400 for the right main, 400 for the right surround, 400 for the right surround back, 200 for the right center, the right front height, 200 for the right center height, and 200 for the right height rear. Oh my God, there's a lot of stuff. But we basically just cut them in half. And because of that, it's kind of neat. You can it separates the load, and we wanted to put balance out how the current load on both systems. And the system is shockingly good, and it's barely what, less than but these are like 4 rack heights a piece, maybe 5. So at the most 15 rack heights, which is quite compact for something that extreme. So we're running what's 400 times 9, 3,200 plus the heights, which are 200. So, and that's 1,200. So we're running 4,400 watts of power, clean power, to drive that room. And the Marantz products have at least a 5-channel 100% guarantee, which means it can deliver that power to 5 channels, 100% guaranteed at a minimum. Many's amplifiers can do more than that. It's very rare that more than 5 speakers are going to require full output at the same time, unless you're doing something like a space shuttle launch. A regular movie that's going boom, 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 each channel is not going boom at the same time, right? So being able to have something like a concert or an action scene, any channel that needs all the power for that channel is going to have all the power for that channel. Very rare that you're going to run all 9 all 4,200. I think it'd probably blow a circuit in our building if we tried. Actually, we had that happen, Frederic. We have a space shuttle launch on the IMAX disc, and all the channels are running, and it literally pops the circuit in the room. And that was always the problem even before we went to this. Okay.
Need a better power conditioner then.
Okay. So if the KEFs are 4 ohm, then what you would do is because somebody's saying, well, if the KEFs are 4 ohm, the BTL would probably lower the impedance too low. So what you would do is you would take 1 channel, 200 watts, and drive the top, high frequency, and 200 watts and drive the bottom. And you would still end up with at least 400 watts for your speaker, and that would be a stable load that it could easily run. Okay. But even if you run 200 watts, just as a channel, it shouldn't have a problem. I don't think it'll have a problem. But the nice thing is you have flexibility to try multiple ways. Okay. So moving on. So let's talk about a few more things. So I want to bring up some slides real quick. So I kind of want to put kind of a recap slide because people ask, what are the upgrade pieces between the different products, right? So this breaks down the basics. So if you're looking based on power, the ability for each of these amplifiers to deliver the power, the same quality power at about the same distortion levels and all that stuff is identical. It's just how many channels do you need in the box? But there are some differences between them, like whether or not using stereo modules. So if you look at the amp 10 and the amp 20 stereo modules versus the amp 30, multiple modules on a single board, right? And then you look at things such as the copper chassis and things like that. So this is a real quick highlight between the two. If you look at 2 amp 30s are the equivalent channel count of an amp 20, but I would just tell you would save money and probably get higher performance if you just bought the amp 20. Now, the benefit of the 2 amp 30s is you can start with 1 and then add another versus, so if you're looking for the upgrade path, 6 channels plus 6 channels equals 12. But if you're debating between 2 amp 30s and an amp 20, you'd be better off just to buy an amp 20. You will save yourself some money. All right. So if I move on from there, and then we look at, there should be another one of these slides. Oh, let me grab it. For the AV processors. So this one here shows the difference. 11.4, 13.4, 15.4. One question we get asked is, say I only am going to use 13 or 11. Is there still a benefit to buying an AV10? An AV10 because of its amplifier layout and the components. We talk about an HDAM, the recipe is a little different. I mean, the recipe is the same, but the ingredients have been stepped up. So think of it as I'm using the same, I'm doing a steak, right? And you have USDA, you have grade A, and then you have Wagyu, right? It's still a steak, but on the AV10, I'm using the finest cut of the steak, the finest truffles, the finest ingredients. So even if I'm only going to run it at 11 channels, and I'm not going to use all 15, if I want the best components that Marantz can possibly buy, and I have those things mixed up. If you look at the pictures, hey Frederic, you notice the pictures are backwards. So if
I was gonna say the AV30 and the AV10's backward. Yeah, they're backwards.
So they're backwards. So if I go back to that picture, you can't really see it. The AV30 picture and the AV10 picture have been swapped. That's me in a hurry. So I'm glad I noticed that. I hope I didn't. So I guess I got to fix that presentation and before we put it out. But yeah, so the picture, don't look at the back. The back picture is incorrect. All right. So some other things too. We talk about the stereo DACs. Like if you look at the image, you see that the stereo DACs are mentioned. So you have your individual boards on an AV10 and amp and AV10 and amp AV20, AV10, AV20. Oh my God. And then you have your stereo DACs, you have your the chassis bigger, there's more multi-layer HDAM boards, higher quality components. So this kind of shows you that you do get more as you pay, besides just more channels of amplification. All right. So Frederic, anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, there's one more thing you can call out is the assignable XLR inputs, which are not available on the AV30. So if you want more flexibility because you're swapping inputs in and out, AV20 and AV10 are the ones to go for rather than the AV30.
Exactly. So yeah, so if you want those inputs, that is true. Actually, so if you go back, actually I think I have a picture of the back of these better. It's
a similar story for the AMP30, AMP20, and AMP10.
Yeah, so you could actually see it in this photo right here. So if you look here, you can see on the second line of the amp of the processor, you'll see 4 XLRs. XLRs are going to be better for subwoofers because you're running long distances, and subwoofers have a habit of getting hum, and subs do really good job of humming. So by using XLRs to connect your subwoofers, if they have XLR inputs, is going to give you a boost in perform. It's just going to work better. And if you look at the AV10 and the amp and the AV10 and the AV20, you will also see over on the second row on the left side, you will see XLR inputs. So you actually have an XLR input. So if you have a high-end CD player or source that utilizes that has XLR outputs, you can utilize that as well. And like I said, if you look in the inside, you can see that there is a noticeable difference. So even though me personally, even though I can get away with an AV30 because it'll do my amp channels, just because looking at that picture and those capabilities, I think I just stepped myself up, Frederic. I upsold myself to an AV20, even though I don't need those the extra surround channels. I do want the XLR inputs for my subwoofers. I do want the XLR input for my network media player. I mean, my network. I have like one of those. It's like a hard drive based music player that I got from my old company that has XLRs, and I want to connect it via XLRs. So even though a AV30 has enough channels for me, just the upgrades that I get to going to an AV20 makes it worthwhile for me. All right. So I just stepped myself up, Frederic. Look, you upsold me.
Congratulations.
All
Ka-ching.
right. Now, is there any other questions that we did not answer? Boom, 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 boom.
No new ones that are in there. We could potentially go back to the difference between the Marantz and the Denon sound,
Okay.
because they're not, even though they're built differently, they will sound different. And
Yeah, so
the analogy that I usually use is Marantz, you are sitting in a listening space. It could be your own listening space. It could be a jazz bar or a concert, and you are hearing the band performing live in front of you.
Mhm.
Very musical, very three-dimensional, very detailed.
Mhm.
Whereas then the sound of Denon will be different. You are the sound engineer sitting in the studio and you hear everything detailed. For Denon, we use the words vivid and spacious.
Mhm.
It's very dynamic, it's very detailed. It's almost more like monitor kind of feel.
Mhm.
And then the question goes, so what should I go for, Denon or Marantz? Well, that's a matter of taste.
Mhm.
Some people who are more into music will probably navigate more to the Marantz sound, whereas people watching movies would prefer the Denon sounds, so to speak. So, but again, I started with Denons before.
Mhm.
I had a couple Denons AVRs. I had a Denon amplifier 2-channel, which is why I chose to go with the Denon brand. But as I grew older, I kind of navigated I like the Marantz sound more. So there's no such thing like you will stay with one brand most of the time.
Mhm.
It depends on how you evolve and what your priorities are. Is it music or is it movies?
And the interesting
That's how I
thing
use it.
too is if you measured them and you looked at distortion and all the things you measure, they look pretty similar. They both perform incredibly well. And you'll see when the reviewers have been measuring the latest Denon and Marantz AVRs using all of the traditional test measurements that these hardcore reviewers measure, they perform incredibly well. But we have done this demo where we take something like a Marantz Cinema 30 and a Denon 6800 on paper, same wattage, same everything, and then we'll play the same set of speakers on both of them, and we'll A/B quickly, and people say, "Wow, they sound different." And then you go, "Which one do you like?" And some hands go up for the Denon, and some hands go up for the Marantz. So it's almost like a speaker. If I look at the measurements on speakers, theoretically, many of them will sound the same, but when you hear them, they don't. So measurements versus what you hear, it becomes more of a personal preference. So some people pick them for the design, some people pick them for the difference in sound, and it's up to you to pick the right one. Our goal is to provide you with 2 different options that sound incredibly well, incredibly great together. It's almost like Porsche and Audi. Both perform incredibly well. Just which one do you prefer, right? So right here, sorry to bit off the topic, but can you
Yeah,
use
it's a good question.
amp? Okay, why don't you read it out, Frederic, and answer it?
Yeah, so can you use integrated amps in these systems, like a mix of Marantz amps and Model 30S or even 10S? So that's exactly what I'm doing at home. I have the Cinema 40, which I use for my cinema system, but I power the left and the front, center front with, no, sorry, the left front and the right front with a PMKI Ruby, which is the predecessor. It's also Marantz. It basically, I listen to hybrid system. It's kind of both integrated together. So when I'm purely listening to music, only the integrated amplifier is on, and I listen to music in stereo. Then when I switch to movies, the Cinema 40 goes on, and I switch the integrated amp to power amp mode. So the power amp mode will then take the pre-out from left and right and power the front speakers for supposedly for the cinema series. So it's a hybrid system and it works both ways.
Yeah, so I think I just brought up a slide that kind of shows that. So I did this for a while because some people want their hi-fi system completely isolated from their stereo system. So what you could do is you can use something like a Model 30 or a Model 10, and you connect all of your hi-fi like devices to the Model 10. And then now you can run it as a beautiful hi-fi system, and you're good to go. Then when you decide that you want to turn on your surround sound system, you go from the darker image, which is just the hi-fi system, to now the amplifier becomes just, you can put it into what's called power amp mode, and the receiver and the amplifier just becomes a power amp, and now the surround sound processor controls the volume and everything else, and then you would use another amplifier, maybe like for example here they're using a amp 30 to drive the other channels. So yes, you can do that, and some people opt to do that. And that's one of the nice things about amplifiers is you can utilize them for a long period of time for a wide range of applications. So that was a very, very good question. Okay, so any other questions before we let you guys go? Okay.
No, we can carry on.
Okay. So Frederic, I think we've covered most of the things. So let me go back and recap. Don't worry about matching a amp 30 with an AV 30 or an amp 20 with an AV 20. The first thing you ask yourself, how many surround sound processing channels do I need? Right? And am I looking for any special features such as XLR outputs for a subwoofer or XLR inputs? Once you know what that is, you pick the proper AV processor, AV10, AV20, or AV30. Once you do that, the next question is, how many channels am I going to use from that surround sound processor? How demanding is the load that I'm going to be, of the speaker I'm going to be using, and how many zones am I going to do? And it may be, hey, the speakers are small, and I'm going to be using multiple subwoofers. You may opt for, and I'm only going to start with 5.1. You may start with an AV30. You may look at it and say, well, I need more power for my speakers and they're demanding. So you may decide to buy amp each channel or BTL a channel. And then you would just work your way through and say, okay, well, based on that, if I add it all up, and I buy out my fronts and I buy out my two fronts, 4. I use a 1 amp channel for my center channel. I use 1 for my rear and 1 for and you just add it all up and you get a channel number. Then you look and say, which combinations, 1, 2, 3. Do I want to use 1 of these and 1 of these to do that? Or do I want to use just 1 of these? Or do I want to use 1 of these and 2 of these? It doesn't matter. Mix and match to get to the amplification that you want. Just sitting here is 16, 16, now we're at 28, 30, 28, 34 channels of amplification. 34 by 200 just sitting here. So huge amount of capability built in. So it's more of a, think of it as Marantz just want to give you options of amplifiers and options of surround sound processing. And based on your need, you pick the one that you pick. Okay, so I haven't heard how a Marantz is different from an A1H. An A1H is a great amplifier. It has 15 channels, a great AV processor. It has 15 channels of amplification built into the unit. But it's all in one chassis. It is the biggest, baddest, best single chassis solution. Marantz said, okay, how can I do better than that? And the way to do better than that is to separate. And now I have much bigger, I have HDAM boards instead of op amps. I have bigger amplifier. I have a whole chassis with its own dedicated power supply for the I have a power supply for the amplifiers. I have a power supply for the preamp stage. I'm separating the noisy amplifiers from the sensitive preamp stages. I can space the digital circuits further away from the sensitive analog circuits. all of that is a benefit of going to separates. So while the A1H is the ultimate when it comes to an AV processor or an AV receiver, going to separates is going to give you more power, cleaner power, lower distortion, and everything else. So if you're looking for the ultimate in performance, separates are going to be a little better, right? Marantz, remember, Marantz uses more parts, better parts that are normally more expensive, which is one, and because of the HDAMs, they have more tuning capability. So if you're looking for the don't get me wrong, an A1H is probably one of the baddest, is the baddest AVR, and it's going to be less space than one of these and one of these, right? It's going to be half the cost. About not one half cost, about 45% less than the amp and the preamp. But if you can afford to go this way, this is going to be the better way. And also remember, in the future, if you want to upgrade your system, if you get an A1H, it's a great amplifier, but the whole thing needs to be upgraded. Versus now I just upgrade my AV processor and I keep my amplifier and I continue to move on. So we're not saying the A1H is a bad piece. It's a great piece. If you tell me, Phil, I don't have room for a big stack of equipment like this. Well, and I want it all to be as simple as possible. I don't want to buy all the extra cables and all the extra complexity. A1H is the way to go. If you say, Phil, I'm willing to give up more space. I want the ability to upgrade it. I want the best way to build a system, and I'm willing to pay a little bit more of a premium. That's where you would go to the AV10 AMP10 combination. Is that the best way to say it, Frederic? Anything else?
Yeah. Well, there's one more argument. The A1H is basically class A-B topology. It will generate more heat. So if you're in a situation where you need to build it in, separates in class D might actually be a more efficient way to run it. So it's all about upgradability and flexibility. So some people may want to upgrade their cinema series because it's also class A-B to class D because they like the sound signature more. It's more dynamics. You got more volume, like they said in the previous slide. The amount of power is just better increased with class D than it is with AB.
Yeah, but I will say, remember, a Denon A1H is not a slouch. At Audio Advice Live, we actually ran, or a couple of demos, we actually ran a 9.4.6 custom theater demonstration using an A1H for 20 and for a theater that sat 20, and it was shockingly good. We actually have in our theater space in our studio, we actually have both systems set up. One of them is an A1H driving a 15-channel Bowers 700 series system with 4 subs, and it's incredible. And then the step up is the AV10 and dual amp 10s, which is just but that's a big jump. You're going, to do that. But we want to show both combinations. So a customer, you could do either way. But if people want to hear the difference and they hear the 2 systems, they're going to pick the bigger system if they can. But not everybody can. Okay? Very good question. All right. So that's about the main thing. So if I was going to summarize, I have a little summary slide, right? So the big benefit of doing something like this, it's like this is just a wrap up, even talking about just the AV30 and the AMP30, because those are the new ones, right? Economy of scale. You have the ability, this allows us now by adding the new AV30 and the new AMP30 to give you more combinations at more price points, right? Adding these 2 models, the AV30 and the AMP30, gives you more scalability, more opportunities to mix and match and find the perfect combination for you while minimizing the amount of channels that you're not going to be using, right? And then, of course, the AV30 is a major step up from the the AV7706. You have better processing, the latest processing, better video switching, all the HDAM, the upgraded HDAM capability, Dirac Live, Dirac Bass Control, 4 subwoofer outs. The list goes on and on. And then this is the little the Amp 30 is the most compact, impressive 6x200 watt amplifier that I've ever heard. So if you just need to boost the performance of an existing AVR, or you maybe are starting off with a 5.1, or you need to add additional channels to one of the bigger amplifiers that we make, this is a great option for you. All right. So anything else you want to cover, Frederic, before we let these guys go?
No, that's pretty much it. I'm going to watch some movies tonight and listen to some more music because you're motivated me again to switch it all back on. And
Yeah.
so it's weekend for us. So obviously it's already Friday. So
Okay. Yeah.
we're here in Hong Kong, obviously.
Yeah. So Aaron Gregg was like, he doesn't have the space for the separates, and he's running a clip system. Yeah, because of the efficiency of the clip system, and A1H will be frightening. You know, it is a very powerful amplifier. We tell people just the toroidal power supply that is in an A1H weighs more than a 2800 Denon AVR. Just the power supply that went into there. It's got the monolithic channel amplifier board layout. It's got this centralized power supply, toroidal power. It's built to another level. So if you're looking for the best one-box solution, no one has ever said that when they got an A1H, it was lacking in power. So that may be the one for you, Greg. That may be the one for you. So to learn more, check out our Marantz website. We're going to be doing more webinars. We haven't done a tour of our new theater, so maybe we'll do a video. I'll have producer Nick, who's hiding over there, do a tour. Me and Cam will go in, or have Cam and Cam put together a tour, because we're always talking about our theater. So maybe I just gave him some homework to do a tour of the theater and talk about the 2 to 3 systems that are in the theater and how we made the layout. Yeah. I always wanted to ask you questions, but I've missed your live video. So make sure you bookmark to make sure that you guys can be in there, and tell your friends, because we want more people to come and ask questions live, because that's why we do it live. And it allows us to talk to you. All right. So Frederic, thank you for coming. What time is it there?
Right now it's almost lunchtime Friday.
Okay.
Midday. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not that bad. I catch you. And for us, it is 7:30 p.m. I am going to go home, have a little dinner, and watch myself a movie on my Marantz system. So take care. Oh, and Nick, behind the scenes, thank you very much for your hard work. So take care, everyone. And oh, by the way, make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't, so we can continue to grow our channel, and I can convince my boss to let me do more of these. So take care, and we will talk to you soon.